Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning into Baxy's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, please subscribe to it, like it, share it with everyone you know. You can also leave a big fat review because that would be wicked cool too. Also, check out Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for our regular updates to find out what's coming up on future episodes. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram of Chicopee. Visit Metro's state-of-the-art dealership right next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or visit metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram today. This is my interview with Belouis. It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
What is it?
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Resistance is useless!
Once upon a time, and you're going to find this very hard to believe, MTV played music videos all day long, and people, such as myself, would spend hours absorbing every minute of it. MTV, of course, is no longer interested in being so relevant. They'd rather produce insipid reality shows than reclaim the undeniable power and cash flow that they once enjoyed during the 1980s. Ironically, the same demographic that used to mindlessly plant themselves in front of their televisions to watch MTV in the 1980s are the same people who complain that their kids spend way too much time with their noses buried in their phones watching Instagram Reels and TikToks, where, of course, you find videos. From the 1950s to the 1970s, music tastes were primarily formed by the undeniable influence of radio. But by the 1980s, radio was following what was happening on MTV. That's how insane things used to be in the MTV generation. Which brings me to Neville Keeley. Now, before you go ahead and look him up, I'll save you the trouble. From 1985 to 1993, Neville Keeley would release 3 albums. But in 1983, very few people believed that a guy named Neville Keeley would be taken seriously as a solo artist. And so he began performing under a mysterious name, Belouis. And that's when things started to blow up. In 1985, Belouis released his debut album entitled Some People. It was an album that included David Bowie's guitar players Earl Slick and Carlos Alomar. It also included the assistance from drummer Tony Thompson and bass player Bernard Edwards from Chic, Guy Fletcher from Dire Straits, and a list of A-list jazz musicians that would seem a completely implausible grouping of people for a virtual unknown making the very first album of his career. The record produced 4 singles. 2 of them became international hits, including Imagination and the album's title track, Some People. The songs were used in commercials and film soundtracks. Combine that with 2 incredibly well-produced music videos in MTV and landing the supporting position to tour the world with Queen just 1 year after their enormous comeback at Live Aid, and it seemed as though Belouis could do absolutely no wrong. And then there was the self-titled second album, which, and you'll hear the story in a few minutes, failed to achieve the same success, largely through no fault of his own. This was a record that not only included the return of Carlos Alomar, but also Pete Townsend from The Who, Julian Lennon, and a bunch of other amazing studio musicians. And as good as that record was, it just didn't yield the same results. It would take another 6 years for Belouis to release a follow-up to that record, 1995's Living Your Life, which was only released in Germany. After that, nothing. For the next 24 years, Neville Keeley and Belouis would walk away from music and from the public eye. But in 2019, Belouis suddenly began performing live again, including at the 2019 Let's Rock Festival, which is the largest rock festival in the UK, and the reaction to his return has been nothing short of incredible. Belouis was scheduled to go on tour this month with Mike Peters from The Alarm and Jay Ashton's Gene Loves Jezebel. That tour, which was supposed to have stops in New Haven, Connecticut, Boston, and Northampton, Massachusetts, have all been postponed due to the unfortunate news that Mike Peters is once again battling cancer. And, of course, we all wish Mike a very speedy recovery. In fact, this interview was recorded just 5 days before the announcement that that tour was being postponed. Nevertheless, the story of Belouis' career and his comeback are incredible ones and need to be shared with people. So what happened back then? And what made him come back? Well, you're about to find out. This is my conversation with Neville Keeley, Belouis on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Mike?
Neville, how are you?
You hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. It's all work, no glitches today at all.
Perfect. Good. I like hearing that. I'm so happy to
Uh,
talk to you. This is really great. You're going to be coming to New England, which is awesome with Mike Peterson, the Alarm, and Jay Ashton from Gene Loves Jezebel. You're covering pretty much all of New England, New Haven at Toad's Place, the Brighton Music Hall in Boston, and the Iron Horse in Northampton, which is literally like, I don't know, 35 minutes away from my house, which is great. It sounds like a really cool
Fantastic.
cool tour.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're really looking. Really looking forward to it. Can't wait.
Yeah. As I was preparing things for today, it occurred to me that one of the things that all three of you share, Mike Peters and Jay Ashton, and certainly yourself, is all three of you have been able to take advantage of some pretty incredible second chances during your career. All three of you share that. I don't know if that's one of the things that drew you all together or what it was, but tell me about the tour and how the three of these acts came together like this.
Well, I bowed out of the music industry, not by choice, but just by the fact that I had a life to live and it wasn't working, and this was like in the early '90s, and you can't just sort of scratch at the edges. You've got to move. You've got to go away, or it's so frustrating. I live in central London. I've got my friends who are in the industry, and it's just horrible if you're trying to do something that's just not going the way you want it. And
Right.
there's only so much you can compromise. I did a couple of records I didn't like, and so I got out, and then I watched as the '80s went from being so unpopular to gradually becoming, people appreciated them for what they were. I mean, to me, the '80s songs were the pinnacle of all pop songs. I mean, the '60s and '70s, they were all building up to, I think, what happened, the creative side of the '80s, and
Right.
so the '90s to me were bleh. so I did other things, and then what happened was I got a phone call out the blue. I was on with my family in the beach, and do you want to do summer festivals in England? This was 2019. I said yes, absolutely. What do I have to do? Just turn up and sing. Okay, fine. There was a house band. I didn't even have to. I didn't worry. And of course, I got there and the audience was fantastic. They knew all the songs, everything was great. And so I thought, this is it. So I rang Rick, who I hadn't spoken to for 30 years, my agent in New York, and he said, huh. and yeah, so we started looking for something, and then COVID came, and
Yeah.
so that's my story. And then, of course, Mike invited me on the tour 6 months ago.
To,
Fantastic.
to come back after 24 years, I mean, that's a long time to be away from anything. I mean, there had to be some sense of, I don't know, some insecurity or fear that either, the audience wasn't going to remember, what you did or who you are. And then to have that experience of they're singing their songs along too, that had to be just an amazing thing to come back after all that time.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. And also my children didn't even know I was a singer, until I said I'm going to do these summer festivals. I mean, and someone had shown them a YouTube video, and my wife, who I'd been with for many years, I met her after I was a singer. But no, do you have fear? No. I mean, I'm going to have a little bit of fear 10 minutes before the first date next week. You can't have fear in our industry. I mean,
Right.
I mean, of course, you've got fear and nerves, and you've just got to rehearse, and you've got to, we have massive egos, I think.
I've never seen any indication of that in anybody in the music industry ever.
No.
But
Listen, I hope it goes well. I mean, I'm sure it will. I mean,
yeah. I interviewed Mike Peters a little bit more than a year ago, and
Yeah.
he was just about to get back on the road, and he was recording things again, like the first time after his last
Yeah.
real bout of cancer. He's just like one of these guys that's just like, he's so relentlessly tenacious and
Yeah.
positive. I mean, he's just an amazing guy.
He's incredible.
He is. He's totally incredible. So, I mean, when I talk about second chances, I mean, there's a perfectly good example of a guy who
I
has
mean,
definitely
yeah.
embraced all of that with great humility and enthusiasm too, which I think is
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it or not, I've never met Mike. I mean, but I feel like he's one of my family now. I mean, we speak, so much, and we've been spent the last 4 or 5 months a lot, and his wife as well is really cool, and his whole organization is great. But I mean, rarely do you meet an artist that is so organized, so together, so he'll email you at 7 in the morning. I love that. I'm living a civilian life. I mean, I'm up. And so you know, he's fantastic to work with, and you get all the answers from him. And so I think, and of course with the cats, I mean, you
Yeah.
know, the strength, mental courage, you know. So he's amazing.
You know, when it comes to the idea of second chances as it relates to you, I mean, you can go back
Yeah.
to the earliest parts of your career. You know, you're primarily a solo artist. You're trying to break into the front door of record companies, and you're having a lot of resistance. You know, for whatever reason, I mean, at the time
They hate solo artists.
they
They,
hated
I mean, they
right.
used to. They used to. You know, they hate it. Yeah.
When and the funny part about it is, you know, I'm listening the other day. I was listening to the that first single from 1981, you know, "Lose It to You," and as I'm listening to it, and you're recording it as Neville Rowe, a solo artist. And the funny thing about it is, you in the context of the time, it's actually a really really good song. And I know
Well,
you've
thank
got
you.
you know Roland and Kurt from you know Tears for Fears playing on that, and I'm listening to it. I'm trying to go, well, how is this falling on deaf ears in the '80s? And I'm thinking this is a song that showed promise. When you record something like that, and at what point do you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and say, okay, well maybe this isn't what I should be doing. Maybe I need to pivot and try something a little different. How do you do that?
You can't think like that. If you think like that, you wouldn't last one day in this industry. You have to have, you know, it's like standing in a station and playing to a crowd of rush hour people who just don't want to, you know, you've got to do it. You've got to be headstrong, and you've got to believe. And yeah, I was doing those songs. And in fact, what happened was I think I did another single after that. And then that is when I had it's a very strange story, because I was a solo artist. It never worked for me when I put a band together. I always had to deal with some musician being really annoying who didn't want to do it that way, or that someone didn't turn up, or
Right.
you know, so I just couldn't take it. You know, I was always too, I knew what I wanted, and I couldn't afford to pay for a band until I had a spinster, elderly, if I may say, bless her, an alcoholic aunt who said, "Well, you've been doing this now for 5 years, and you're obviously pretty useless at it. Why haven't you got anywhere?" And I said, "Well, I'm a solo artist. I can't play live." And so she, I say, lent me. She gave me some money. I mean, you're talking hundreds of pounds. You're not, you know, hundreds of dollars. You're not talking,
Right.
but it was enough to put a band of, you know, straggly musos together, rehearse them up, and go out and play. And I got a recording deal, you know, straight away. So that was up two fingers to the record companies then. You know, I've been going backwards and forwards to them as a solo artist, but as soon as I was a band, you know,
Well,
it was different.
so when you decide to change the name, you chose a name that sounded like it could be a band, even though it's still
Yeah.
you as a solo artist. It's actually a very shrewd move. There's a little bit of mystery for one.
They didn't think it was shrewd then.
Well,
Trust me. Everyone said,
I'm sure
"Oh, you're mad."
I'm sure they
Yeah.
didn't, but ultimately it wound up working out for you because
Yeah.
now they're seeing you more as a unit rather than like an individual artist.
Yeah. And I've always loved having a band. This is the problem. I've always been a live artist. Do you know, I then went on to play. I mean, I played every toilet in the United Kingdom. You know, I did it, you know, you name it, I did it. And I loved it. And for me, the bit I wanted to do was play live. And but you know, as a solo artist, you can't do that. And I wasn't political. I wasn't all those things that were trendy in the 80s in England, you know, and Britain. And so you know, that was it. And now this band I have for the tour, it's all American seasoned musicians, fantastic people.
Yeah.
The band sounds incredible. I mean, I'm so happy to be working again with American musicians, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm more comfortable with them. And you know, I like having a band.
So you change the name and you record some more singles and they didn't really
Yeah.
go where you wanted them to go and EMI you know Parlophone signs you and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
You attempt to start recording your first album and for whatever reason you're not satisfied with the way it's sounding or the way it's coming out. My question to you is, I mean, first of all, what were the issues there and how did you get EMI to give you a second chance on that record? Because I mean,
Well, they didn't realize that was the answer.
what they don't know won't hurt them.
Absolutely. And they didn't know I was the thing was that because I'm a solo artist, I was flying a little bit under the radar. I was recording. I had a fantastic A&R man, very famous in the industry in the UK, a guy called Dave Ambrose, and he believed in me. And the producer was a bit of an experiment, and it was really the record company's fault, not mine. I mean, I didn't really want the guy, but they said you must have a producer. So I had this producer, and he just didn't turn up for weeks on end. So it would be me sitting in the studio, and this is the fun bit with people like Guy Fletcher, who was starting out, and Chester came. And Guy Fletcher, of course, went on to become part of Dire Straits, and has been for 30 years Mark Knopfler's main guy. I mean,
Right.
he produces Mark now, and he's a legend keyboard player. And so we were sitting in the studio, the three of us, with this engineer creating. And so I'd had the basis of it. And then I met through someone said, you must do a remix for your first single, which I thought was rubbish. But they said it's in New York with this guy called Steve Thompson. And he's just done It's My Life, by Talk Talk. So right. I got on a plane, came and met him, did the mix. It was great. I said, you wouldn't be able to start producing some of my songs again. And he was great. And he said, yeah, and I've got Carlos Alamo and Bernard Edwards and Tony Thompson. So we were all starting out. So we started fresh. It was the first sort of productions he did as well. So that's the story of my album.
So here's, to me, this is where everything becomes really interesting, because, so now you've got Carlos Alomar involved in it, who, I mean, you talk about a great business plan. The best way to create a new album is to hire some of the greatest musicians that have ever walked the face of the planet. A brilliant idea. So how did you even get introduced to Carlos?
Well, I mean, again, you can't do that on paper. In theory, you can say, I'm going to put the best band together in the world. It doesn't happen like that, because musicians are, are very obstinate, bloody-minded people as well. I mean, especially at that level. Carlos Alomar didn't need to do my record. He obviously liked what he heard. It was Imagination was the first thing I did with Carlos. And Carlos had obviously knew Bernard Edwards from Chic and Tony Thompson very well, because they're all in New York, but they'd never worked together. So he said, well, if I'd come and do this is a great track. Steve's new. I like working with Steve Thompson and Michael Barriere. I'll bring Bernard Edwards and Tony Thompson. So, it was a rainy Saturday afternoon in October in New York. I turn up, only been to New York once before. And I look very out of place with my white hair, and I've got all these seasoned old school musos. And we recorded Imagination there, and then live vocal, mixed, finished. And actually we went out and played more or less the main mix that night in a nightclub.
Amazing.
And that was it. It just happened. But that had taken me 6 years, Yeah,
but who does their first album with those guys? I mean, nobody does that. I mean, that's just like
it wasn't supposed to happen. It just happened, I mean, it just, and I think then Robin Clark, Carlos's wife, started doing the vocals. I think we had Ava Cherry, and then Jimmy Malin came in and did percussion. I mean, basically, it just snowballed. Oh, well, I'll do it. If they're doing, okay, who is this young English guy that no one's ever heard of? Of course, I got back to England, and it sounded amazing, but the English press hated me. Who does he think he is to go to America and make that record with them?
Yeah, but I'm sure, but it was very different in America when they hear this and they go, holy cow, how'd this guy get all of these guys? And it sounds terrific.
I don't know. It was luck. It wasn't luck. I was very pushy.
Yeah.
I'm not, as solo artists, we can't be walkovers, we've got to be quite direct.
Yeah. I interviewed Carlos Alomar a while back too, and he kind of like in a way, kind of like Mike Peters is. He's such a positive guy.
Everyone loves him.
I would imagine that to work with a guy, it's hard not to just get swept up in that positivity. I mean, he's such a down to earth guy, considering he's got like one of the biggest resumes of all time. But
you have to calm him down. I mean, you have to calm him down. The funny thing is, on some people, there's a guitar solo Carlos did backwards guitar, and I've always hated it. And I'm like, Carlos, anyway, it's very nice. Do you think we could save it for sort of like home listening? Or I've been trying for 40 years to remove that backward guitar. I have actually on the live show. I've removed the backward guitar. I'm sure he's going to be mortified anyway.
I know that David Bowie's always been a big inspiration to you from years ago.
All of us,
everybody. And it's interesting because I mean, your voice has been compared to his, and not unfavorably. It's actually it's a good comparison. but it's, you know, it's very clear that you've listened to a couple David Bowie albums in your in your
But
time.
wait a minute, Mike. I'm from South London. I mean, my mother lived in Beckenham, where David was from. I was brought up in Forest Hill, which is half a mile. We've got South London accents. I mean, so that in my defense, there's a little bit of that. I mean, a little bit. I mean,
Well,
obviously, I grew up listening to those legendary albums, but
I think anybody that grew up in that time was
Yeah.
influenced by David Bowie, whether you lived,
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
5 minutes away or across the other part of the
Absolutely.
world.
It's a style, isn't it? It was a style of singing that happened in the 80s, I think.
Well, I think that's what's remarkable about him is the guy always found ways of you know
Yeah.
of bending things enough to influence other people where, you know, people looked to David Bowie to what was coming up next. Even if he was absconding ideas all along the way himself, he made things so much more accessible for people. I think that's part of the genius of David Bowie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall I tell you how I met David Bowie for the first time?
No, tell me about that.
Is I was doing recording with Carlos, the second album, because then for the second album, I was able to put a proper band together rather than bits and pieces. And Carlos Alomar and Carmine Rojas, and I brought some English musicians in, and we mixed everyone up. And it was great. And I still hadn't met David Bowie. And one day, I mean, and those days, you know, we were on the rampage every night. I was in New York for 3 months with my band. I mean, imagine what we were doing every night. And so one night I said, you know, I used to tease Carlos if he had an early night, you know, because he was a bit older than us. But so one night he said, well, meet me in I think it was the China Club. I seem to remember, this is 40 years ago. He said, meet me in the China Club at 11 o'clock. Oh, all right, we all trundled. So he said, oh God, come here. And he said, come through. So we went out into the storeroom. And I said, what are you doing, Carlos? You're acting strangely. Why are we going to the store? We went in the storeroom and there was boom. It was David Bowie going, hello. Here I am.
Wow.
You know, nice to meet you. And Carlos had arranged for David to be hiding in the broom cupboard.
Just to meet you.
Yeah. Well, very kind. Yeah. Well, obviously I haven't sort of like, you know, been recording and you know, and Robin, his wife, had been on tour with me with Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And
Right.
so we were pretty close. And he'd been on stage a couple of times with me, actually.
You know, you kind of fell into a lot of very, you know, advantageous situations. I mean, not just with the band, not just with the record, but you are also coming into all of this at the time of MTV, which, you know,
Yeah.
at the time, you know, kids today wouldn't know this, but old guys like us certainly would, that MTV was enormous. And
We needed MTV. We needed it. You know,
exactly. And, you know, especially with you know, artists that would not normally get played on the radio, MTV was completely essential. And your videos, you know, like Imagination, for example, was like really groundbreaking in a lot of ways because one, it was a video that they hyped up quite a lot, even though they really couldn't play it in its entirety, which is amazing to me. Tell me about the MTV experience and about that particular video.
Well, I think the thing was with the video, we knew, I mean, I knew, and it was pretty obvious. American radio mainstream radio was nigh on impossible to get. So you had to go college radio, club, you know, dance charts. So you worked all the way around. And the video, because they had all the clubs had the screens in those days. If you remember, they were all showing videos. They all had screens, the whole side of one wall. Every bar in the country had a screen, and they ran videos all night. So people would sit there looking at the video. So it was pretty obvious if you did a video that was groundbreaking and different, people would catch on. And so it wasn't purely intentional, but the Imagination video was Storm Thorgerson from Hypnosis. And I think you know your history. He designed all the
album covers,
all the album covers for Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. He was a legend.
Yeah.
And he started doing videos, and he did the video, but he didn't do the video to the record company brief. He did it to his own brief, which suited me fine because the guy was a legend. And you know, at this stage, I was breaking all the rules anyway. So we did a 7-minute, 12-inch dance video, and then had to unfortunately chop it down to 3 minutes, which was really hard because it's probably the most boring video ever on MTV. But outside, people talk about this legendary video, which every interview I do, they ask me about, which of course had full frontal nudity right from the beginning.
Right.
And I don't think it was gratuitous. I think it was it was just, I think the audience was shocked. It wasn't like a load of dolly birds running around, jumping up and down. This was boom.
But
Yeah.
but again, when you and I think like Duran Duran kind of did this too with
Yeah.
Girls on Film. The moment that you discover there's a video that has full frontal nudity, it
Yeah.
makes Americans want to see it that much more, and they'll actually pursue it.
Not just
Aggressively.
Americans, if I may say.
Well,
Not
no,
just
but
Americans.
well,
Yeah.
I can't speak for the rest of the world. I can only speak for us Americans. When you hear that,
Yeah.
like, well, I gotta find this. I gotta search this out.
Even now, it's like, well, I better check that one out.
Yeah.
I think that, by the way, we're the same all over the world. I mean, if you, it's, a beautiful woman. But it was, and it worked with the song because Imagination's it's not an up song. I mean, it's not a particularly down song. It's quite a thoughtful song, I think. And so I think the video worked quite well. I think it was quite thought provoking, and it ran. And of course, the great thing was that because of the way it ran all night and every bar and club actually in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
And that broke me. And MTV were able to talk about it. In fact, they launched the video MTV at Studio 54, and they couldn't even show it on the channel, if you know what I mean.
But nevertheless, we were, at least here in the U.S., we were so focused on music videos and the importance of them all. I mean, there really wasn't like a cultural phenomenon that's you talk about like kids, wasting their time, screen time with their phones and tablets. I mean, back in the 80s, our screen time was like literally sitting in front of MTV and not moving for hours.
For hours on end.
Hours.
Yeah.
And
it was great, but it was so exciting. It was groundbreaking. It was visuals as well as music for the first time, rather than just listening to a record and imagining it. You could see something amazing.
Yeah. And you mentioned it before that, what that also inspired was some of the best pop songs of all time, really got broke by MTV and would never have had the opportunity to emerge commercially had that not existed and that was their focus.
Absolutely. And I think the same with worldwide. I think not just English and UK song, not in just American, but European things, that it meant everyone could go out and experiment and try and do something different and break some boundaries and push it. And some of them were awful, by the way. That's some pretty terrible videos out there.
But that didn't seem to matter to the audience. I mean, I remember like the Big Country video in a big country.
Yeah.
They're riding ATVs in a field, and we thought, oh, this is the greatest video I ever saw.
Yeah.
It did not matter until it started becoming more artistic, and people started to all of a sudden they're putting in like real money for production values, and I think about the time that that you were doing videos, that seems to be the time when they were really investing into the production value of these things.
Yeah. I think I'm still at the stage where, I think we got some money towards the Imagination video from Playboy, and Swatch certainly sponsored Some People video.
Sure.
Because they were so expensive. The record company would have a budget of say £30,000 and they cost double that, and maybe double more, 3 times that. And that was another way that I could be a little bit creative and go, well, why don't we try and get some money from them because sponsorship was new.
Right.
Now it's something we just take for granted, but bands weren't sponsored before the sort of early 80s, were they? I don't think they were. No. Coca-Cola with Duran Duran, I think, and was probably groundbreaking, I think.
Yeah. No, it certainly was. So you're going through this whole period where, there's a lot going on, and you're really kind of, on this tidal wave in your career. And I've spoken to other people that have had great commercial success, and it's a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways, because on one hand, you're reaching success, but on the other hand, everyone wants you to repeat exactly what you just did. It's such a hard thing to recreate a second time. So when you go on and now you're working on a second album, there's still great songs on that second album, but I mean it couldn't possibly do what the first record did. Tell me about that, from like the first record to the second record. What was, What was your feeling about what you produced and the way it was received?
Well, I think some of the songs that I think the song. I mean, I'm going to do some of the songs. I mean, I think the songs are great. I don't think I have a problem with that. Um, I think the songs weren't given a fair chance, but this is not. This is every artist has a reason, but there's so much involved in putting out a record,
Sure.
and you know, for my second record, which everyone had very high hopes for it to do really well, and Let It Be With You and Animal Magic were both big dance records, and all around the world, in the States as well. But the problem was to make the record happen, it had to happen in the UK, and it was happening in the UK. And then they released the record on what we call a bank holiday in this country, which is a Monday when everything's closed. So you had 3 days to get the sales to a level where the chart position would reflect. It's as simple as that.
Hmm.
And the guy who released the record had released it on the wrong day. As simple as that. The record didn't happen. The European charts, the English charts, radio died off. And of course, in the States, who were going to throw everything at it, United States, they said, well, it hasn't happened in the UK, guys. And that is the honest, basic, what happened truth. And so it didn't kick off the way it was supposed to. And it's very hard to resurrect a record, wasn't it? And I think that's probably what killed the record, the second record.
What a kick in the face that is.
It's taken me 2 years to make, and some of the greatest musicians in the world and videos and everything tours lined up. Yeah, did I want to kill people? Yes.
Yeah, I would imagine. I imagine you would.
Do I still feel absolute hatred and anger towards the people who? What's the nice word for mess something up?
You can say it. You can,
yeah.
You can say fucked up. It's fine.
Yeah, they fucked it up. And the guy was really apologetic. He said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I made a mistake."
Yeah. Okay.
You made a mistake.
Yeah, you made a big mistake.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, it's as simple as that. I don't normally rattle that one out because it just sounds like an artist making excuses, but that's what happened.
One of the other things I want to ask you about is, and this is, this is, it's 1986, and you were asked to be a support act for Queen on their Magic tour. This would have been the following year after Live Aid. They had made a huge comeback, and this is maybe the biggest tour that they had in maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in that? I mean, that was a big get to suddenly be on top of that tour. How did that?
Well, I was
happen?
very pushy. By now, you've realised I'm very pushy. I mean, basically, what had happened was I'd been sniffing around. I was on the same label. I'd been sniffing around this tour that no one knew about, but I knew it was going to happen. And I'd sort of met, I drunk one night. I'd met a couple of members of Queen and told them, "You need me. You need some young, fresh blood." And and they said, "Oh, go away." But what happened was, and there was the Montreux Pop Festival in 1986 in Switzerland in May. And every band in the world went there. And I mean, all the bands from the States and everywhere. And it was a massive party for 3 or 4 days. And we did the show, and the show was great. And it was the same time as Queen were going to launch their tour. And Freddie was there. And he came down, having watched the show on TV. He had a house in Switzerland. He came down and he made a grand entrance. And he came in and he demanded to meet Belouis' son. And you've got maybe 50 acts. And the EMI, the managing director of EMI, was a guy called Peter Jameson, said, "Well, okay, I'll go and find him." He came trundling around looking for me. I was pissed in the corner, as you are. That's
Sure.
I was chatting to everyone, and there was this like, "No, well, Freddie Mercury wants to meet you." So anyway, I went up, and he said, "I want him to do my tour. He is going to open for the tour." And the managing director's going, "No, it's cost so much already. You can't do this to me." And all the other acts were like, I did the tour. I didn't say no, did I?
Oh, of course not.
I said, "Of course I'm going to do it." And I ended up doing some great stadium things, which was wonderful. And in particular, Nedworth, which was very famous in this country.
So when you met Freddie and he says, "This is the guy," what was that conversation like?
He said, "He's the only one tonight who's going to do it. He's the only one." And I was very embarrassed because these other ones are all my friends, and he's the only one. And he was such a great guy. He became You know, his charisma, you know, when he walked in a room, like all those tremendously big stars like Mick Jagger and David Bowie, when they walked in a room, you can feel it. Elton John, all those really big old legends, you know. And you know, you've interviewed so many great people. You know what I mean? You know.
Oh, I do.
And,
Yes.
yeah.
Well,
No,
I've heard the story about, you know, you and Freddie before, and I just think it's just, you know, it's what you kind of expect him to react like. You know, this is you expect something, you know, big and elaborate, just in just the way he was. I think it's such a great story of you of him telling everybody, and just like you said before, how, you know, like British audiences were saying, well, who does this guy think he is? That had to happen all over again when Freddie, you know, put the crown on you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I got the real Queen diehards still can't, you know, mention my name and they lose it. I mean, and I loved it when I was opening for it. You know, they said, "Well, he must be in love with him," you know, or he must have some kind of relationship with him. Oh, don't be so stupid. And also remember, the other members of Queen were just as I mean, they were all really close, and that's what I loved about Queen. They you know, they were all. It wasn't just Freddie; it was all of them. I mean, no one made a decision on their own, but Freddie was, you know, you zoomed into Freddie, you know, but they were all. The movie was very authentic.
Yeah,
I thought.
Yeah. As time goes on and the second album comes out, the third album comes out, and you talked about, you know, walking away from music for 24 years. And like you said, it wasn't all of your decision, and, you know, you didn't want to do something that wasn't going to succeed. But what did you do during that time? I mean, 24 years is a good long time to be away.
Well, as a sort of mid-range pop star, let's call me a pop star, in the United Kingdom, who spent the last 15 years thinking they're going to be a legend and they write great songs and they're, you know, and in those days, you know, you got stopped in the street and I had white hair and whatever. Now I'm stuck in a position where I've got to find a career. Trust me, it ain't easy. You know, what am I going to do? Go to university, become a lawyer? I'd given up exams at school. I had a band at school. You know, I wrote a musical. I didn't do exams. I failed them all. So what am I going to do? Work in a shop? I mean, like, so I'm unemployable. So I then, you know, I mean, completely, we're all unemployable if we've been famous. I mean,
Sure.
So I thought, so I scraped around and then I thought I'll open a bar restaurant. So I got some money together, found a fantastic site in London that is a legendary site, and and I started to build my nightclub. And it cost I had £300,000 and it cost £1 million. So it was amazing. It was great fun. And it lasted for a year before the bank got to me and said, "We're going to have you, you know, and we're going to close your club down." And it's a very famous club in London. I was able to pass the lease on to a friend of mine, the Wellington Club in London. And for that year, I think it was the best club in London, you know, but mid-90s.
Yeah.
So I did that. And then I had to start again and reinvent myself again 2 or 3 years later, which I started the film production company and made some, you know, small movies that, you know, and did stuff. And then now my wife and I have a nursery business. So that's what we've done.
That's what you're doing. But it's so amazing to, you know, here you are, you know, 2019, you decide to start performing live again. And it's really fulfilling and it's really, you know, exciting for you to get back and to not really have, you know, a great deal of resentment or disregard for any of it. It's just like you're kind of, you know,
I bottle it up, Mike.
Yeah,
Bottle it up.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. It's like, you know, for a guy who could very easily have just, you know, gone through his life just kicking a dented can down the street. I mean, you've basically said, you know what, I'm going to do what's fun and something that I love, and you're doing it again. I think it's awesome.
Thank you. I mean, the thing is, you know, you never lose it. It's my career. It's my life. It's what I should have been doing. But you know, you have to park it and move on.
Yeah.
And you know, but now it's back, and hopefully it's going to be everything that it should have been for the last 30 years.
Well, you know, you couldn't have picked a better tour to be doing that with. Again, The Alarm with Mike Peters and Jay Ashton's Gene Loves Jezebel, and like I said, you're going to be all over New England the next couple of.
And we're all different acts, which is great. We're all, you know,
totally different acts. It's a very unusual collection of artists, but I mean, it's an interesting one. And like I said, you've all have that experience of of getting those second chances to do things over again,
Yeah.
as opposed to fading into the woodwork. I'm so happy for all of you. I really am.
Thank you so much. Well, we are all excited. I mean, but I tell you, you get your money's worth at this one. I mean, you know, it's gonna be one hell of a show. I mean, my band's amazing. So, and I know that Jay's band is, and I've seen the Alarm now on YouTube videos. So, you know, live videos, and their gathering he does in Wales every year is amazing.
Yeah.
So.
Neville, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the time today. You know, best of luck on the tour, and
Thank you. Well, and hopefully I'll see you at the leather. Is it
Northampton, the Iron Horse,
the Iron Horse? What is it?
which has just recently been reopened. So it's a pretty exciting time for everybody up here in Western Massachusetts.
I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, it's a great club.
I'm so excited about the whole thing.
You should be. It sounds great.
You.
Neville, thank you so much. Have a great day.
And my pleasure. Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye. As I said at the top of the podcast, the tour with Belouis, The Alarm, and Jimla's Jezebel has been postponed. I'll keep you posted when those dates get rescheduled. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it, subscribe to it, share it with everyone you know. You can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. Thanks to Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram for their support, and thanks to all of you for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.